Welcome to Your Bird Story, a podcast about everyday people and their relationships and interactions with wild birds. I'm your host, Georgia Silvera Seamans. Well, listeners, today I have the pleasure of interviewing Christine Mott, the author of a new children's book, Freebird, Flaco the Owl's Dreams Take Flight. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
The title of the book lets us know what the book is about, Flaco the Owl. Can you tell us about your relationship with Flaco?
So, I guess millions of other people, I followed Flaco's story the moment it hit the press, right? Everybody was just amazed at the story of this captive owl who managed to escape the Central Park Zoo after living there his whole life in captivity in a cage so small he couldn't even fly. He amazed the world by escaping, and not just escaping, but surviving, learning how to fly, how to hunt, how to be an owl. So my relationship with him was just, I guess, an admirer from afar. I was cheering him on and just so happy that he had the opportunity to be an owl, really for the first time in his life. So I followed all of his adventures, and I really just felt like he was such an amazing story and individual that I wanted his life and legacy to live on.
Were you able to spend a lot of time in the park with Flaco?
I wasn't. So I am a New Yorker at heart, born in New York State, lived in New York City for almost 20 years, but I actually had relocated to the West Coast by the time Flaco had made his escape and debut into the world. So I never got to see him in person, but loved watching the videos and photos of him from afar.
Can I ask if you have a spark bird and what that bird is?
Yeah, that's a tough question for me. I feel like I identify as a lifelong animal lover. So, even as a kid, birds are always something I think especially little kids can identify with. Like little kids always want to have superpower, right? And a lot of times it's something like flying. So birds are just such magical creatures. I don't know if I have one spark bird, but I'll share one memory. When I was little, I grew up in a small town in upstate New York. We'd have this little craft fair, and people would make these, homemade artisan crafts. And I remember wanting these little blue robin's eggs made out of wood. They were so beautiful, and I would keep them. And my mom would show me when in the springtime when robins would visit our yard and leave a nest and let me have a peek at their eggs. So I remember one spring after the robins had left their nest, all the fledglings had flown away and the nest was empty, I put my robin's egg, my fake robin's egg, into the nest. And I thought as a little girl, well, maybe they'll come back and lay more eggs. And sure enough, I left that egg there. The next spring, the mommy bird came back, and she actually left a clutch of eggs with my egg. So that was pretty magical. So I guess maybe the American robin is my spark bird.
That is a very sweet memory. Thanks for sharing it with us. So you mentioned being a lifelong animal lover, and I know that part of your professional experience and advocacy work is in animal welfare, both on the legal side and policy side. Could you tell us a little bit more about that work and where it might intersect with birds?
I'm a lawyer. I went to law school wanting to be able to help animals with my degree. So I took animal law classes. I had the benefit of having a wonderful mentor, animal law mentor, who advised me to join the Animal Law Committee of the New York City Bar Association, which is actually the first animal law committee of any bar association in the United States, and they do amazing policy and legal work. I ended up becoming the chair of that committee for many years and led legal and policy efforts on a number of issues on a local, state, and federal basis as it relates to animals. So, everything from better laws to protect animals in factory farming, banning the sale of dogs and cats in pet stores. And then as far as wildlife, I mean, there are so many issues that touch wildlife and that are still big issues. One big one that we worked on for years and thankfully was signed into law is the banning of wildlife killing competitions, which unfortunately were quite common in New York State. And for those not familiar with what that is, it's a contest where they'd say, okay, whoever can kill the most squirrels or kill the most pigeons or doves wins a prize. You can imagine just these horrific blood sports. Thankfully, about a couple of years ago, the bill was finally passed into law and signed by the governor, banning these wildlife killing competitions. But there are many other issues that I worked on that frankly still need a lot of support from the public. I think a lot of people would be surprised to know that while New York State has felony level animal cruelty laws for torturing or severely mistreating animals, that only applies to companion animals, which are defined as dogs and cats, other animals that are typically kept in the home. So we've seen time and time again horrific cases of cruelty to wildlife. I can think of off the top of my head. I remember, I think this happened in Albany. A group of teens approached a swan sleeping in a park and beat the swan to death with a baseball bat. And unfortunately, because of the way New York State's laws are written, those individuals were not eligible for appropriate punishment. They got a slap on the wrist, a misdemeanor charge, which is simply insufficient to account for the cruelty and crime. So those are some of the examples of things that I worked on. But, animal law is such an interesting area of law because you can't open the book and say, okay, where's the section that says animal law? It's really kind of a compilation of all the different laws that are in the criminal law, commercial law, environmental law, health law, all these laws that impact animal in some way. So it's really kind of twofold. It's educating the public on what are the issues that are impacting animals, and then educating legislators and pushing them to hopefully introduce and pass legislation that can improve our treatment of animals in society.
It sounds as animals seem to be a cross-cutting topic because you mentioned you'll find statutes related to animals in different areas of law. The treatment of animals impacts a lot of different kinds of people and in a lot of different ways of life.
It's so true. I mean, some other examples of that are in an area I worked very closely on is the intersection of animal cruelty with interpersonal violence. And that can include things like domestic violence, child and abuse and neglect, to things like, mass crime, mass violent crime, school shooters, serial killers. The FBI tracks this kind of stuff. It's a well-known fact that people that engage in these types of crimes and violence have either engaged in animal cruelty prior to harming humans or were exposed to that. So, to take the example of, I think people are pretty well versed in kind of serial killers and mass crimes of, you can think of all of those folks started off by hurting animals. If you look at something like child abuse or domestic violence, it's a different way. Animals are used as kind of pawns in how people are trying to control their victims. So if you're an abuser and you are abusing your partner or your children, a very common tactic that the abusers will use is hurting the family pet as an indicator of, do you see what I can do to the pet? Imagine what I can do to you, child or partner. And also as a means of controlling the victim. And examples of that are, if you try to leave me, I'll kill the dog, I will hurt the dog. Or if the child were to report what the abuser is doing to the child, they will give away the pet or they'll harm the pet. So these are very common and unfortunate scenarios. Another issue that we're working on from a legal and policy basis, and that is trying to get teams and different policy efforts to work together. So if you are in CPS, a child abuse investigator, you should be trained and aware of signs of animal cruelty in the home, because you might be able to save a child. That might be a red flag if the animal in the home is being abused. Well, guess what? The children might be as well. Things like domestic violence shelters, many of them can't accommodate animals. So this is another well-known statistic. 70% of women and other victims of domestic violence delay or do not leave those situations because they don't have a place for their animals to go, or they're fearing for their companion animals. So these are all ways where we need to look holistically at, how we're helping people, how we're helping animals, because it's absolutely so connected.
it sort of speaks to sort of circling back to something you mentioned. That's part of what you do is educating the public about animal welfare and animal rights and the great need that we have to protect the animals that we live among. And certainly this book is part of that conversation. Why did you write a children's book as opposed to something for strictly an adult audience?
Great question. Yeah, I mean, most of my professional work has obviously been geared towards the adult consumer, right? Trying to change opinions of adults and other professionals. But I guess having seen so much and the broad scope of how animals are treated in society and the need for change, sometimes to me it boils down to something so simple as trying to start from the very beginning. Let's start at the basics. If we can help children grow up to have a good frame of reference, good morals of how do we treat other people, how do we treat other animals, how do we treat our planet, that's inevitably going to lead to good change for everybody. So my thinking was, this is such a special story that obviously many adults connected with, but I wanted it to kind of live on in the ethos of a tool for children. How do we get children to connect with animals and understand their value, that they have feelings, how they can connect with them and understand and appreciate them, and open that door to, I guess, a realization. And, we may not think that the kids are so self-aware that they'll be able to deal with concepts like that, but they absolutely can. Just understanding that this bird also had feelings not unlike my own, is such an important thing for a kid to understand, right? Those birds I see, those pigeons, on the sidewalk, I shouldn't kick them. That would scare them. I would feel scared. It's trying to put the child in the position of the animals and create that natural empathy, which can lead to so many other wonderful and beautiful things and hopefully more humane treatment of animals.
Right away when reading the book, and that the book is written in Flaco's voice. So you're telling the story from his perspective as opposed to there being a third person narrator of this story. Reading it, and I read it to a child in my life, it felt like a very effective way to convey the message of animals having intrinsic value and having feelings and experiencing hurt and joy. As humans do, we're also animals as well. I wanted to point out to folks that the book is written in Flaco's first person voice.
Thank you. Yeah, and that was absolutely kind of a conscious decision. I think that helps kids connect more with Flaco and the idea of taking life from his perspective and his shoes. So I'm so glad to hear that, you and the child in your life enjoyed that. So thank you for sharing.
And the scenes in the book also, I'm so curious how you worked with the illustrator, because as someone who lives in New York City, all the scenes depicted in the book, whether it was Med City Field or MoMA or fire escapes or pigeons or red-tailed hawks, quintessential New York City, really I felt of a place. And I'm curious how you worked with the illustrator to choose those particular vignettes in the book.
Well, I love my illustrator. It was just absolutely fabulous. And I couldn't have succeeded on this project without her, Ofra Layla Isler. So I first wrote the story and then, set about trying to find an illustrator who could bring the book to life with illustrations, which are obviously so critical for a children's book, right? That's kind of half of the story is the visual impact for kids. It was also really important to me to find somebody that was also an animal person. So Ofra is also an animal advocate. And I knew that she would be able to understand what I was trying to convey. Again, illustrations can convey so much, that feeling. And I tried to create emotion and feelings for the other, I guess, side characters in the story. That Flaco either has, the other animals at the zoo, or the sparrows that come to visit him, or the sad carriage horse, another long-time issue we're working on. I really wanted kids reading this to be able to not just identify with Flaco, but see all the other animals and see maybe just a glimpse from their perspective too. So when I found Ofra, she obviously connected the story and the idea of the importance of Flaco's legacy. So we worked together to create concepts and visuals that kids could really understand with. And probably a lot of the audience is maybe either New York based or has visited New York. So these would be things that they would know right away. But hopefully also this book lands in the hands of kids that maybe have never visited New York City. But I think so many of the locations and scenes are so iconic that even if you're from the Midwest or the South and you haven't visited, you'd be like, yes, of course, like Yellow Taxi and, you know, the high-rise buildings. And so, yeah, I really wanted to feel like very, very New York, very obvious so that kids could connect with that.
Now that you've said it, I don't know why I didn't realize it as I was reading the book, but while the main character is Flaco, you are introducing readers to a whole host of other non-human animals that inhabit a city and the relationships that they might have with each other. So yet another layer to this book. You have committed to giving half of the book's proceeds to the Wild Bird Fund. For folks who are not familiar with that nonprofit organization, can you tell them about the Wild Bird Fund and what sparked this gift to this nonprofit?
The Wild Bird Fund is a wonderful nonprofit based in New York City, and its mission is to rescue and rehabilitate wild animals who've been injured or orphaned or for whatever reason need help to be nursed back to good health, and they release them back into the wild, barring any circumstance that an animal just was not be able to go back to the wild. To me, this is true conservation. This is how we should be treating wild animals, with the care and respect and the understanding that they belong in the wild. They don't belong behind a glass wall, behind bars for us to look at. They belong in the wild. So they do such incredible work that I hope will really inspire for the next generation of this is how we save animals. But also, very importantly, they don't just save the pretty animals or the special, unique wildlife. They're there for any animal that needs help. The common pigeon that has, wire stuck on his leg and he needs help, they're going to help him. And this is also, I guess, demonstrated in the illustrations of the book. When people think about New York City, they don't think about wildlife. But there's such an amazing community of wild animals in New York City. Everything from, coyotes, raccoons, porcupines, all sorts of birds that migrate back and forth. Like you wouldn't think there'd be an Arctic owl that makes an appearance in New York City, but so many animals either call New York City home or pass through. So it really is also just so amazing to have this organization that dedicates itself to helping all these animals. And they're a nonprofit. They run, solely on donations. And the idea of the book is to inspire change for animals. And so what better way than to give back to an organization that's actually on the ground doing the good work to help these animals?
It's really, I think, quite generous, and it's not often something you see with books. So I read the books back to cover, front to back, all the pages, and I saw that and I knew I had to ask you about it. For my final question, I wonder if there are a couple of call to actions that you can provide to people who are interested in wildlife conservation, bird conservation in cities. What would you want folks of any age to take away from this book?
So first and foremost, I guess, even if you live in a city, open your eyes to the wildlife around you and just really appreciate the living beings that are there and respect them. It could be as simple as, if you're a parent, please teach your kids to respect animals. It's one of the things I try to do. I'm a mom of 2 kids. As soon as they could, walk and run, you see so many kids that it always drives me nuts, like chasing pigeons and birds. And well, it might sound like, not a big deal. It's again, just teaching kids compassion. Like, would you want to be chased? Like, how do you think those animals are feeling? Help them connect, help them redirect their energy. What can we do? Could we go bring bird seed to the park and feed the birds there? Could we go on a little bird adventure walk and see how many different species we can find? If you live in a space where you have the availability to put out native plants and a bird feeder, those are wonderful things you can do to help your local wildlife thrive and survive. And it's wonderful for you too, because then you get the benefit of having these wonderful visitors come to you. It's just amazing. I love every time filling up my bird feeder and they're so happy they all, flock to it. There's some other great things that you can do too. In New York City, and this is part of Flaco's legacy, there are obviously so many big buildings and so much glass. And a lot of people don't realize that birds cannot identify glass from air many times. And that is sadly the fate of so many birds, that they crash into glass windows. They simply cannot discern that it's glass, a hard surface, and not air that they can sail through. So a simple thing that you can do in your own home, whether you live in an apartment building or a house, is get these wonderful, they're these clear decals. The Audubon Society has them. You can find them on Amazon. They're clear decals. They could be in the shape of a bird, a flower, a leaf, really anything. And it helps the birds be able to identify that it's glass. It's not air. And so they hopefully prevents bird strikes. So that's a really wonderful, simple thing that you can do. And for those who live in New York City, please contact your city council member and ask them to pass Flaco's laws. So as part of Flaco's legacy, there's a package of bills in New York City that are aiming to help wild animals like Flaco and others by just basically helping to treat them better and preventing needless suffering and death. So one of the bills is asking buildings to retrofit old windows to have these bird safety decals, and for new construction to have bird safe glass, meaning that the glass is already built with different colors and elements so the birds can see that it's glass and a hard surface and won't crash into it. The two other components of the bill are a pilot program to replace the use of rat poison with birth control for rats. So happy to say that part is actually passed. So it's an amazing thing that I hopefully will become not just a pilot program, but just common practice throughout the city and hopefully many other communities. Because you don't already know, using pesticides, whether it's meant to kill a bug or a rodent, it never stops there. These are poisons that live into the food chain and impact so many animals, including your dog, your cat that walks in the areas that have, the pesticides. There are so many links between people that are using, Roundup in their yards and their dogs getting cancer. And then, of course, people getting cancer in these things. So it's one of those things where you just parents and, educate your kids and educate yourselves. There's no need to be using things like these poisons because it just harms everyone, including yourself. The ban on rodenticide is part of Flaco's laws. And the last piece that we need your support on is passing a light pollution ordinance, which basically means that in the nighttime hours, residential buildings, businesses need to dim their lights or turn off non-essential lights in the evening hours. These are lights that just stay on for no real reason, and they have a really unfortunate impact on migrating birds. And literally millions fly through New York City, and light severely disrupts their migration patterns, and in fact can cause more bird strikes and crashes, can also cause them to actually get stuck in light tunnels. The example I like to remind people of is, if you can remember the 9/11 memorial before we had the museum, it was the two spires of light. Do you remember that? And birds passing through would get stuck in those light spires. They would try to fly through and the light would basically trap them. And so these birds would get stuck in the spires. They would fly and fly and fly in circles until they died of exhaustion or had a heart attack. It was just really very sad. So that's just kind of an example to connect people of, it doesn't sound like light could hurt these animals, but it certainly can. Even in your own homes, if you don't need the lights, turn them off. But everyone, if you live in New York City, please call your city council members and ask them to help support the passage of Flaco's laws.
I'll add that New York City Bird Alliance works with the 9/11 towers, and so there's a threshold in terms of the number of birds and the amount of time that the birds get caught in the Tower of Lights. And once that threshold is passed, then the lights are turned off to allow the birds to disperse and continue migration.
That's great.
Yeah, an incredible list for call to actions, and I think there's something there for most people. I really want to thank you, Christine, for talking with me about the book and the larger ideas around animal welfare, animal compassion.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity, and I hope you all can pick up a copy and support your local wildlife rehabilitation organizations because they do so much in every community. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine. Christine mentioned adding decals to your windows so that birds can perceive your glass windows as a solid barrier. The most effective spacing for decals is 2 to 4 inches apart, covering the entire surface of the window. Thank you for listening to this episode of Your Bird Story. Like, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Your Bird Story is an initiative of Local Nature Lab.